is dead.
One of TV's most shocking moments took place Sunday night on Fox.
In dramatic and disturbing fashion, the producers of Family Guy killed off Brian the dog.
Brian's dead!
This is all my fault. I'm the one who had to throw away the damn time machine.
Outrage is spreading across the internet over the death of a talking dog.
Different dog.
Yeah, this one's like Italian or something.
Throughout animation history, there are moments that transcend the medium and cement themselves as cultural milestones. Moments where a show doesn't just entertain its core audience, but becomes a pop culture phenomenon. Think the death of Maude Flanders in The Simpsons, the era of South Park where they actually killed Kenny, or the first time Goku went Super Saiyan, or the first time Trunks went Super Saiyan, or the first time Gohan went Super Saiyan 2. Among these is the time Family Guy killed off Brian Griffin. Yes, the anthropomorphic martini-loving liberal dog who'd been a staple of the show since its debut in 1999. Even in a series that thrives on irreverence, I mean, we've seen Peter kick the bucket multiple times as a joke, this death stood out as a cultural event. It's something people still bring up when discussing the show, and it even became a bit of a meme. But I seldom see people bring up what it was like to live through that event. The outrage, the disbelief, and the uncertainty of it all. Unless you knew how to look up an episode guide. Today, I want to change that by not only walking through the entire story arc from beginning to end, but also giving my thoughts on the build-up, the aftermath, and what it felt like to experience this moment week by week. This is the death that broke Family Guy. The seeds of Brian's demise were planted months before the episode aired. At Comic-Con 2013, the show's producers teased that season 12 would feature the death of a griffin. Not a minor character or a guest star, but one of the 6 family members.
One special episode that we have for the fall is we're actually going to kill off one of the Griffin family and replace them with a new character.
I mean, it really could be anyone, though.
It could be anyone. Any one of our 6 main cast.
Cue collective speculation. Fans were in suspense for months. Who would it be? Lois? Too central. Peter? Impossible. Meg? Actually, I can see Meg. After all, the running joke was that no one in the family cared about her.
Hi, Dad.
Plus, Mila Kunis was juggling other projects. And again, it's Meg! I'd buy it. Fans made their case for each character, with Brian being an obvious contender. But when the titles for the season leaked online like always, fans couldn't help but notice the name for one episode in particular, Life of Brian. Very subtle. Despite the ominous title, not everyone bought into Brian being the target. Some fans had out hope that the show would pull a fast one, like killing off Chris or Meg as a red herring. Despite the title being a dead giveaway, Fox hyped the hell out of Life of Brian, dubbing it the big one. They let us know that this episode would indeed be a point of no return. We would be losing a Griffin.
Last July, the producers of Family Guy dropped a bombshell.
We're actually going to kill off one of the Griffin family.
This Sunday, the question the whole world has been asking will finally be answered.
Aren't you supposed to be running around? Don't talk to me. You have a bad reputation in the chicken community.
Family Guy, all new at 9/8 Central, Sunday on Fox.
So when November 24th, 2013 rolled around, the world tuned in to witness an episode destined to go down in Family Guy and television history. According to the episode commentary, the crew intended the Life of Brian to be the start of a 3-part story arc, without the show spelling it out. Which makes sense. Let people know something crazy was happening without putting all the cards out on the table.
It always was designed as sort of like, I think Seth has even described it as like a 3-parter that didn't happen to have the words to be continued in between.
This episode has a pretty wild opening. Turns out Stewie went back to 17th century Jamestown and gave guns to Native Americans off screen. Now, in the present day, Native Americans make up the vast majority of Americans. The houses are tippas, the mailboxes are totem poles, and even the Griffins are walking stereotypes. Who would have thought such an emotionally impactful episode would start off with 4.5 minutes of race jokes? The thing is, if you didn't look into this episode and were just some random viewer tuning in, you would have a hard time suspecting anything heavy was coming. Although it's rare for episodes to open right in the middle of the action. That said, time travel is almost always associated with Brian and Stewie. So for those locked in with Family Guy news, it was clear that the big death would impact their relationship and that time travel was going to be a crucial element development. After narrowly escaping disaster, Stewie decides to destroy the time machine to avoid further chaos, telegraphing to the audience that any events from here on out are irreversible. No takebacks. With the time machine dismantled, the pair decide to salvage a hockey net. It's just a typical day. Until it's not.
Brian, look out!
The way this moment is animated is kind of haunting, especially the first time around. After 11 years worth of memes though, I can't lie, it cracks me up.
Brian, no!
President Bush did this!
Hey, Brian, what do you say we go to the Klan?
Originally, the crew considered framing it from Stewie's perspective, watching from a distance, helpless, as Brian is hit.
The other one was a little bit more, I think, dramatic in terms of live action, where we saw Brian in the distance getting hit by a car from Stewie's point of view. And we never really cut into sort of under the car and making it a little bit more dynamic. But I think we felt like it looked visually a little bit more interesting.
Can you imagine if they tweaked out like this? This would have been an HBO Game of Thrones level gut punch. I demand to see the storyboards if they're out there somewhere. But what we got instead wasn't much lighter. This is still pretty brutal.
You've given me a wonderful life. I love you all.
The show lingers on Stewie's grief, culminating in a surprisingly emotional burial scene.
He was like a brother to me. I'm gonna spend the rest of my life missing him.
Sure, the funeral has its jokes, but there's a genuine attempt to sell the finality of Brian's death. His last moments and burial were genuinely heartfelt. Family Guy rarely has earnest moments like these. At least, they're few and far between after the first couple seasons. The last time they had a moment this real was, ironically, Brian and Stewie. So it was both kind of jarring, but also refreshing. But Stewie placing the flower on the grave, that shot is burned into my brain. This is Stewie's best friend, his only friend. We saw them go through thick and thin together. So watching Stewie go through this hurts. And then there's Vinny, the Italian-American mutt, voiced by The Sopranos' Tony Sirico, is introduced as Brian's replacement. Vinny is fine. He's a talking dog with a New Jersey accent. That's pretty much his entire personality.
Hey, don't get fresh with me, Studio.
That's not my name. That's not even an Italian version of my name.
Spoilers, but I almost wish he stuck around long enough to leave an impression. The rest of the episode follows Stewie struggling to accept Vinny while grappling with his grief, coming around at the very end.
I'll never forget Brian. You're not supposed to lose him ever.
I wonder if Stewie is analogous to the audience. And that was that. People thought this was legit the new status quo. Brian was dead, Vinny was here to stay. The end. No happy ending. Honestly, the episode was touching in parts, but it's hard to ignore the backlash that was quickly brewing online. Fans were livid, and some were even heartbroken. Petitions to bring him back cropped up overnight. Some poor soul straight up got a tattoo memorializing Brian. Not sure if this was just a bit, but someone should check up on him and see how he's doing nowadays. Bro is stuck with a lifelong conversation starter. TBS even aired an in memoriam tribute, like this was the Oscars and he was a beloved fallen actor.
So, you should watch TBS to see all the things he did before he died.
Okay, that's insane.
The internet was mourning a cartoon dog like he was a real person. A dog they were annoyed by just 1 week prior. I can only imagine what the TikToks would have been like back then. Behind the scenes, the Family Guy crew took the backlash as a compliment. It proved how much Brian meant to fans.
Obviously, this episode created a huge response, much larger than I think any of us anticipated, which we took as a nice compliment. I mean, obviously, people over the years really came to grow and love this character, and we certainly didn't want to upset anybody.
That said, they didn't let on that Brian's death was only temporary, not even to their own families.
You find the man who did this. You bring him. You show the world why.
I remember there were theories that the driver was a character we knew, and that Brian's death was done with malicious intent. This ramped up into a full-on murder mystery, even though that was never how the episode was presented. Of course, Quagmire was the primary suspect, given his historical animosity toward Brian. There was an insane theory that Vinny was the one one in the car so that he would later get adopted by the Griffins. Giant Chicken was a suspect, given his long-standing rivalry with Peter. I think the idea there that this would serve as a way to get revenge and hit Peter with the grief of one of his best friends. And one of the more morbid theories is that the car was driven by a future version of Brian that went back in time to do the deed. Obviously, that would trigger the whole grandfather paradox, and we don't have time to get into all that, but needless to say, these theories were getting out of hand. Say what you will about this stunt, but it went beyond just some ploy for ratings. For better or for worse, it was clearly keeping the show fresh for longtime fans, which the crew absolutely intended. Sadly, while it may have seemed like we were in uncharted territory, if you knew how to work Wikipedia, then the fun was already over, as episode guides already confirmed that we had some Brian-centric episodes on deck. Kinda took the sting out of it a little bit there, guys. So how do they follow up on this major twist? Well, let's get into the next episode, In Harmony's Way. Following Brian's death, the next episode tries to go back to business as usual. It's actually remarkably unremarkable. Mid, if you will. The most notable thing about this episode as it relates to Brian's death is that Vinny replaces him in the intro to really sell the idea that old boy is gone for good. Yet the actual premise of the episode just revolves around Peter and Quagmire forming a singing-songwriting duo. And Vinny? I mean, he exists. Cool. Despite being the new dog, Vinny isn't given much to do. He doesn't enjoy the A-plot or interact with the family in any real meaningful way. Which is crazy, because they have the easiest setup possible to make him relevant to the story at hand. Have him tag along Peter and Quagmire to really sell that he's a part of the family now. Quagmire could have been thrilled to have Vinny around by virtue of not being Brian. And come on, 2 guys and a talking dog? That's a sick gimmick for a band. And one that fits right in with Family Guy. Alas, Vinny's just kinda there. I feel like his irrelevancy in this episode was an odd choice that undermines the attempt to establish a new status quo. To be fair, this tonal whiplash was definitely intentional. By making the second episode feel like a regular Family Guy outing, the writers doubled down on the illusion that Brian's death was permanent. Still, to me, it left Vinny feeling underutilized. Peter and Quagmire's credit card song is fun, I guess. All too real, but fun. We love a 2-man band with Seth MacFarlane as the only member. My goat for real. Don't quote me on that if he gets canceled. Being one of those weird few who looked up upcoming episode titles and descriptions for shows I was into, instead of, doing homework or, socializing, I already knew what was coming next. You see, before this episode even aired, I read the synopsis for the next one, Christmas Guy, which included a peculiar blurb for the B story. Stewie tries to get what he really wants for Christmas. Gee, I wonder what Stewie could possibly want for Christmas right now. It was clear to me, and some others, that Stewie was going to find a way to bring Brian back to life somehow, and Vinny's time on the show was going to be tragically short-lived. So let's move on to Brian's greatest power move as an atheist. One-upping Jesus by dying for not only 3 measly days, but for 3 weeks and coming back to life. By the time Christmas Guy aired, fans were desperate for some kind of resolution. The A story is centered around Peter trying to help Lois's dad, Carter Peterschmidt, find the Christmas spirit after Carter cancels the annual holiday carnival. And that's all fine and dandy. As usual, it's a vehicle to throw as many gags as possible at the audience.
Take it, Carter. Take all the nog. No.
But what we're really here for is the subplot. As to be expected, Stewie is struggling to find the joy in the holiday season without Brian. He's still very much down in the dumps. I do appreciate that out of all the characters, Vinny is the one to recognize that Stewie is still really going through it. He knows that he's meant to be a replacement, but instead of pretending like everything is fine, he puts his best foot forward to try and actually connect with Stewie in his own way. Sadly, Stewie's a bit of a stone wall. But when the lad spots a past version of himself at the mall, a Stewie who hasn't yet destroyed the time machine, he realizes there's still hope. This was actually pretty clever because the other Stewie that we see was actually a Stewie that was used in a cutaway gag back in Life of Brian. This was probably the first time they used a seemingly unimportant cutaway gag to move the plot forward in a significant way. That's the kind of writing I love to see. I appreciate the move there. Stewie's able to snag the machine away from his past self, and before he travels back in time, he shares a surprisingly heartfelt moment with Vinny that hints that he actually grew fond of the dog and appreciates everything he did for him.
Good dog, Vinny. Georgette, I'm coming home.
Brian, look out!
Feeling good.
We still don't know who was driving that car, and we probably never will, so if you spent all that time theorizing back in the day, I hope you learned your lesson from expecting a big dramatic twist in a show like Family Guy. Anyways, Brian's alive, Vinny never got adopted by the Griffins, and it's back to business as usual, thus bringing this weird saga of Brian's death to a close. To this day, some fans are adamant that they reversed the decision to kill Brian after the fan backlash and decided to bring him back. If this were an outlier show like South Park that produces their episodes within the week they air, that theory may have held some weight. However, as I'm sure many of you know, cartoons take a long time to complete. There's just no feasible way they could have gone back on that decision in 2 weeks. It takes an episode 9 months to a year to complete. The crew even had to mention this themselves.
But one thing we found interesting, and we were talking about this just the other day, was that a lot of people assumed that there was such outrage about Brian dying that's then why we brought him back 2 episodes later. And
that was my favorite.
Yeah, and that's just not physically possible. Kara knows best of all that there would be no way humanly possible for us to assemble a show in 10 days.
South Park could do it.
It takes like 9 months to make a show.
Right, yeah.
So that's why it's not possible.
Even more than that, actually.
Yeah,
So
we're like a year and a half.
Not to mention, old Seth poked fun at fans back in the day for buying this stunt in the first place. The fan reaction was mixed. On one hand, people were thrilled to have Brian back. On the other, the quick reversal made the entire arc feel like an elaborate prank. Was it worth it? That depends on who you ask. We got some beautiful memes out of it, so I'd say definitely. Ultimately, the arc surrounding Brian's death and resurrection feels like a strange footnote in Family Guy history. Again, there was really no payoff to the mystery of who hit Brian. No one but Stewie was all that sad after his initial passing. So it's easy to feel as if none of this really mattered, because it really didn't. Vinny's potential was left unexplored. We didn't really get to know him, which is a shame because I think having more characters that are talking animals is neat. I'd like to see how different dogs carry themselves in society. Not to demand world building from Family Guy of all shows though. I get not wanting to replace Brian full-time, but throw poor Vinny a bone. Apparently they considered giving him to Cleveland, but since he has a whole family that barely gets used, maybe it's for the better that he didn't end up with the Browns.
God, look at my mom. Dinner should have been served half an hour ago. She's clearly stalling for time.
Say something!
I'm glad Donna gets some lines here and there though.
How was the pork? Who is this bitch?
Unfortunately, Vinny's voice actor Tony Sirico passed away in 2022, so odds are we're never seeing this dog again unless they recast. But I doubt they're gonna go through all that trouble. I'd love to be wrong though. While the stunt was a fun idea that made waves and reminded fans how much they cared about Brian, it didn't lead to any lasting changes. The world of Family Guy quickly returned to the status quo, leaving this whole saga feeling like a thing that happened. I guess we can't expect too many lasting changes from a show like Family Guy. Again, it's never been a show that takes itself too seriously. Low-stakes deaths like Mr. Weed, Diane Simmons, or Peter's dad can be expected from time to time, but offing a main staple of the cast is just unrealistic. It's also clear they didn't expect Brian's death to make the waves that it did, but even then, I just think they could have handled the execution better. Maybe they could have shifted things around so that the third part of the trilogy was a season finale instead of a holiday special. That would have helped evade things like synopsises spoiling that Brian was appearing later in the season. Maybe if Vinny played a more significant role in the second part, or at least stuck around in a different role after the fact, this would have landed better, because then it would have truly been an event that changed the show forever, as we could have gotten a new character out of it, someone else who could be milked for marketable plushies. Regardless, for a few weeks in 2013, Family Guy was at the center of the cultural conversation, and in a show built on absurdity, maybe that's all that really mattered. And there you have it, the death that broke Family Guy for like 2 weeks. How do you feel about this little arc? Should Brian have stayed 6 feet under, or are you glad he wasn't benched in hell for too long? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Twitter and Insta at @OffShrinkThoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please sure to like and subscribe to the Roundtable for more great cartoon content. Shout out to my boy Michael Williams for helping with the script, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace!